In the East, they call it Western welfare, but in counties, rural counties of the West, they call it a lifeline for their very survival. It's called SRS and PILT. Hi, I'm Chad Booth. Today on the county seat, we will pick up a conversation that we've had in the past about secure rural school funding and payment in lieu of taxes, and how vital it is to our local communities in the public land counties of the West. Let's get a little background from Don Dunwell.
It's that time of year again. While many of you are thinking of the Christmas season, rural leaders in western counties know it's time to once again climb on Uncle Sam's knee and beg for continued funding of the PILT and SRS programs. Payment in lieu of taxes and secure rural schools are federal funding programs that compensate counties for unrealized property tax revenue that would otherwise come from federal lands and the loss of local tax revenue previously obtained through timber sales on the U.S. forest. For a county that loses only 10% of its land mass to tax-exempt federal land, it's not a big deal. But what happens when that percentage explodes?
For Garfield County, we're the largest forest county in the state. 93% of that county is owned by the federal government. The SRS money is absolutely critical to us. Why? Because we've lost all our sawmills. Plain and simple.
SRS funding started during the Clinton administration with an act by Congress. That bill compensated rural communities who were deprived of the 25% gross sales receipts of commercial logging when policy changes at the Forest Service put an end to a harvest strategy for timber and replaced it with a mostly preservation policy. While nowhere near the funding that came from royalties, SRS funding is spread out across the county in a number of ways.
It goes to the school district, it goes to the county, it's for infrastructure. Let me give you a good example of what life is like for us in Garfield County. We can run that county for 16 days from property tax revenue. Counties back east rely 100% on property tax revenue. So we rely on federal intergovernmental revenue. Sales tax, for example, state mineral lease money, but federal money as well. And we don't like that. That's just the reality. That's the hand I've been dealt when I go to do a budget.
This shift from production royalties to minimum reimbursement is difficult for counties to juggle. But rural counties, as a rule, are resourceful and manage to keep all the balls in the air. The real problem is the constant threat by Washington, D.C. to turn the spigot from a trickle all the way to off.
One of the real challenges we have with PILT and SRS is it's been funded on a year-to-year basis. And because of that, the counties have never know if the next check is coming. And so they have to build a budget based upon a funding source that is not secure.
PILT and SRS are commonly called Western welfare by those who don't understand their purpose. However, Western rural counties see the two funds more as liquidated damages due from an act of negligence, and until things get better, the county still needs them to survive. From the county seat, I'm Don Dunwell.
When we join our panel of experts, county commissioners in public land counties in the rural West, we will continue our conversation on SRS and PILT here on the county seat.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Planning your next conference or corporate event? The Davis Conference Center offers 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting and exhibit space, plus high-tech audio-visual services that will make your event a success. Whether you're planning a training, meeting, company retreat, wedding, or large convention, let the staff at the Davis Conference Center help you arrange your next event. Located east of I-15 in Layton, call 801-416-8888 or visit davisconferencecenter.com today. Color, it's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are in St. George today at the Utah Association of Counties on the road for our SRS, Secure Rural Schools, and our PILT, Payment-in-lieu-of-taxes program. Joining us for our conversation today, Commissioner Gordon Topham, who this will probably be your last appearance on the county,
yes, it will.
as he is stepping down as a county commissioner. Thank you.
Unless I'm on as a criminal sometime.
And Commissioner Jim Mattson from Kane County, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Good to be here.
So I want to kind of focus for a few minutes. You know, a lot of people have heard on our program, people who've started watching, about PILT and SRS, and they go, okay, well, one's a school fund, one of them is a substitute or a supplement for property taxes. But I'd like to kind of talk about why, what you do with the money and why it's or you feel entitled to it. I guess it's an entitlement program. Why are you entitled?
Well, the PILT money that comes in is based on we deliver services like we do to every taxpayer in the county. And so rather than they paying taxes, they give us this money that we, and it's pretty much not encumbered. It goes into our general fund and we can use it for about everything we want. The SRS fund, or Secure Rural Schools, is different. That money comes, the program started because the Forest Service, being part of the Department of Agriculture, quit running as an agricultural business. At that one time they were harvesting trees, they were grazing cattle, all of this stuff, and the money, 25% of that came to the county where the money was generated. And when they quit doing that, several years later they realized that there was a bunch of money that had been coming to us that we weren't getting anymore because they weren't producing anymore. So in our county, when that check comes, 50% of the check goes to the schools. You know, in my county, that means up to 6 teachers are paid by that fund. We're a small county, so that's a lot of money for us. The other half of that is divided, 85% goes into our road department, and then 15% is divided, 7 and 8% part goes to the Forest Service for projects they have that's managed by a lay team, an advisory board. They make the suggestions of where they spend that. The other comes to the county for very specific purposes, search and rescue, wildland fires, and fire mitigation work. We have, and Kane County has even more than we do, they have a lot of private land up in the forest. And so we take that money and go in and write a Firewise plan to protect those houses, and then we go in and remove the vegetation that has to be. That's what that fund's used for.
Gordon mentioned the 25% fund on the National Forest, and over time that was set up in the 40s so that you could recognize what counties and other entities had to do in order to help support those kind of functions in our counties, since there's a little or no private lands to speak of. So the Forest Service and its approach toward management over time shifted from harvesting and generating revenue and supporting our economies to basically burning our forests down. We'd rather be out there with employment and undertaking some of those efforts. So the description as to what Secure Rural Schools was to replace came out of the Clinton Northwest Forest Plan. And they were supposed to then replace that 25% fund with those kind of funds. And now we're subject to year-to-year appropriations and whatever the whims of the Congress are. And we're completely dependent upon that. So schools and roads are suffering because of that.
So I guess the question I have is somebody might look at this and say, okay, well, I used to have to go out and like justify property tax values, and the assessor had to do his work, and the tax collector had to do their work and everything. And now I just sit back and get a federal check. Boy, that seems like easy street to me.
We don't assess it. We don't assess it, and it's a very minimum part of what it would be charged if it was private property. It's just a token of what the value of it would be if it was private property. So
I think we'd rather switch it back to where those lands are actually under the control of the state and local government, and in that process we'd generate our own revenues and pay our way that way without being on the dole from Washington, with what I call the banks of the Potomac.
So, Jim, you have a background in forestry.
I sure do. Yes.
And so I guess my question would be, what kind of money was involved in that?
Well, at one point in time, you might be buying or selling wood and forest products that would be $100 a thousand, 10 million board feet, and that could amount to $25,000 to $250,000 a year revenue for these counties as such, and under the 25% formula. So. And
now you have to fight for that much?
You have. Well, if you get any wood at all, it's a miracle. But on the rest of it is that this other approach to it just simply isn't able to pay its way and to help us out like we used to have.
Excellent.
We'd rather pay our way.
I understand that, and I like that attitude of self-reliance. We're going to take a quick break here on the county seat. We'll come back with our conversation about SRS and PILT in just a minute.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about secure rural school funds and PILT. It seems to me that there are other impacts beyond just the direct funding. Obviously, when you got 25% of the revenue generated out of the off of the sale of timber, that probably exceeded proportionally what you're getting today. But are there other economic impacts from it?
Yeah, the secure rural schools, part of that goes to schools. And if you'll think about that, when we have a working forest and we have the timber industry out there harvesting trees, timber mills in our communities processing those trees into lumber, then we have a whole bunch of jobs, and everybody that has a job pays income tax to the state. And in the state of Utah, almost all of that income tax goes to the schools. So the schools were getting buku money because everybody was working in the timber. once the timber industry went away, then we lost all of those jobs.
Wasn't there also a property tax benefit from the mills as well?
Yes, from the direct mill and the manufacturing sites themselves, but also your workers had family-sustaining jobs, and out of that came the ability to own property and to live in these communities, rural areas, and to contribute. And the benefits from a health and other standpoint as far as those kind of things were readily available. Now we've kind of allocated our people toward the minimum jobs, and none of that resource comes back around again. In fact, if I can, Chad, one of the other things is that the timber industry, of which I used to be a part of it, we used to bid against each other and pay the federal government to harvest the trees, and that money, from my earlier reference, went to the banks of the Potomac. Now we have to run everything on appropriations that takes place out on that national forest, so it no longer pays its way, locally or otherwise.
So when the Forest Service went from a production to a preservation attitude, do you think they fully took into account all of these ripple effects? Because I mean, every time you guys open your mouths, you're telling me here's yet another negative impact from the federal government not making money off of the sale of their lands and creating a liability to us instead of a revenue source to its impacts on local economy.
I don't think they did. I think a lot of people with an environmental agenda thought the best way to manage a forest is to keep your hands off of it. As a biologist, I know that isn't true. If you don't use it, as a farmer, if you don't use your fields, you lose your fields. Those things were never considered. So I think it was an environmentally driven agenda that sort of caused these decisions to be made.
I'd use a different term. I'd say preservation agenda with those impacts as such, but most of the people that would have had any kind of knowledge about that put their 30 years in and at age 55 retired and went upon their merry way. It left this residual for us to figure out what to do with it afterwards.
So we have a new administration about to come in. We have a change in Congress, and so supposedly the idea is that we have a bunch of fresh ears in Washington that are going to listen. If they believe in grassroots, what would be your prescription? What would you do?
Well, you know, even though there's grassroots, a lot of the grassroots are not in the West where the public lands are. So those people still may not understand it as well. And those are the ones that elected the Trump administration. So there's an education process there as well. But I think the new administration is going to look at productivity, and as Jim mentioned, there's money to be made in these lands if they would just go after it. I'm afraid now we've lost the forests to a point we can't go in and make money off of them for several years, because we've got to go ahead and clean out the deadfall, get the trees growing, and it takes, I don't know, probably 20 to 30 years before a tree gets big enough you could harvest it.
To get the tree large enough to get your industry and your workforce back again as it was, it's a 20, 30-year process. So all of that takes a while to rebuild itself as we go along. So we can't be just whipsawing this thing back and forth.
So Donald Trump has just told whoever's new Secretary of Agriculture is, he said, I want you to make the Forest Service work again and be productive. I want all this money to be made. And that guy comes out to Utah and he sits down and he says, okay, you guys write the rule book. What are we going to do? What would you do?
Well, the first thing I'd say is let's make these landscapes, these watersheds, productive in the sense that they can sustain themselves. We'll have clean water, clean air, and we can have local economies and cultures that can sustain itself on that basis. It's a simple matter of taking the growth, and in spite of us, those forests continue to grow unless we burn them. So here, let's just put them in this shape and figure out a way to sustain our local communities this way, and our counties in that fashion.
They're very unhealthy right now. We need to go in and clean them up and put the Band-Aids on, put the Band-Aids on and clean them up and make them healthy for us again.
But even in diseased forests where some of the timber may not be harvestable for usual purposes, isn't there an economic benefit in that fiber that sits there?
Sure, you bet.
What are some of the things that you can do with that?
Produce energy. Utah Power and Light is looking at, or talking about, I shouldn't say looking at, possibly using some of that fiber to burn to create energy. You know, like we're using coal now. They wanted to do an experimental situation to take a look at that. I hope they do. I hope that doesn't go off their board.
Out of a forest, you know, you'll get your solid wood that come from the round cylinder. Roughly half of that makes solid wood. The other half makes fiber of one sort or the other, whether it's sawdust, shavings, chips, and all the rest of that. So we've got companies down in our area that are actually now taking the fiber from those operations and making playground soft cushioning, you know, so that we can in turn put those out for kids to play on. So in addition to what used to go into paper and other kind of wood fiber products now are finding their own niche. From Sevier County on down, there are turkey growers, and they use wood fiber bedding for the turkey farms and all the rest of that. So that ties in with that kind of a process.
Could some of this deadfall be used for that?
Absolutely. Chip it up.
So if he made you the Department of Agriculture head, what would be your first marching order to the to the Dixie? And seeing as that's your home forest.
Well, I'd like, first of all, to be the chief of the Forest Service. That's all, you know, across the board.
Okay.
But I'll be the agricultural secretary.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay.
But back to regional foresters and back to forest supervisors, we've got to have this to where it reconnects with the people and the resource and out on the ground itself. And that's not that hard a deal. It's already been done once. We've dismantled this thing.
The decisions need to be made at the local level. That's the problem. If we could just deal with our local foresters, they understand it. They used to. Sometimes we've got people in there now that may not, but...
Do they have the right education anymore? I mean, I know people used to go to Utah State and get a forestry degree.
Some of them do. Some of them do. I think there are some that get involved
but they're all working for Weyerhaeuser
environmental education and stuff like that, and yeah.
We simply have been putting people in our agencies into doing jobs for which they weren't educated nor are they experienced to be able to handle it in. And you just don't turn over a farm to someone that's a non-farmer. The same thing's true of agriculture and forestry. I think the same thing.
So you alluded to something a little bit earlier. You said it's going to take years to get forests back to where it's healthy. Let me ask the question. What is a healthy forest? How many trees per acre is a healthy forest if you're in conifers?
When I first got out of high school, I worked for the Forest Service as a forestry aide, and we would mark off an acre, or our crew boss would, and he would mark the trees on there to leave, and we would cut everything else down. And I can't remember, that's a long time ago. It was either 20 or 40 trees per acre, and then you'd take everything else out. Then those trees could grow. They didn't compete for sunshine. They didn't compete for water or minerals. They was still enough light that came through that you had understory that grew, so you had healthy grasses and everything like that. Now there's places in our county that there's over 800 trees in an acre, and probably 80% of those are dead in most of the places.
It's just not sustainable, and I think Gordon's right. 25, 40 trees per acre would be about what you'd replicate in a natural setting in terms of what it can do to sustain itself.
So people would, if they were used to seeing 800 trees, you can't see through the woods. Will the animals have enough place to hide with 40 trees per acre? Because I know that's what the guy sitting in the city's looking at.
They can't get into the forest now. With the deadfall and everything, it's pretty difficult.
If you've got a mechanically thinned forest, where it's just uniformly 25 or 40 trees, that creates a different question. But the forest didn't evolve that way under fire regimes and so on. You have clumps and clusters, but it turns itself over in that respect. So, yes.
So we can mimic that.
If anything, you need understories with grasses and forbs, as Gordon has indicated, so that we can feed the wildlife. Right now, they can't eat wood.
Well, it might be a new fad diet for them.
So, yeah, I understood that part of why this started with the Forest Service was the owl, and somebody told me the other day that now those forests that have been protected for the owl habitat are so thick that the owl can't even spread their wings to fly in there. So they're moving on to other forests and private forests where they can still live. We've ruined their habitat trying to protect their habitat.
The greatest effect on spotted owls have been horned owls. Truly.
I've heard that. I've heard that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back on the county seat talking about PILT and SRS, mostly SRS as it's turned out during this conversation. We'll be right back on the county seat.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Bigwater, Small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Let's be honest, you don't know much about Beaver County. Well, let me tell you about it. It's the birthplace of outlaw Butch Cassidy and inventor Philo T. Farnsworth. Some of the best skiing in Utah is at Eagle Point. You've got camping, Canyon Breeze Golf Course, Crusher and the Tushers, Beaver Territorial Courthouse, snowmobiling, renewable energy, Pioneer Car Show, Squeaky Cheese, Ghost Towns to explore, best water in the country, Paiute ATV trails, Old Frisco Kilns, horse races, hunting, fishing, and it's a good place to live. Beaver County, mountains of fun. I could tell you more, but why don't you come and see it for yourself?
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about secure rural funds and PILT. We've got just a couple of minutes left. Final thoughts, guys.
Well, the reason it's critical right now is we haven't been funded for 2016. The last funding that was approved by the Congress was 2015. Now, if they will get that in the omnibus bill or one of the minibus bills they're talking about or in the budget, then we will still get the money for the 2016 year that we're in. That's why it's critical that they do something, is because we have, like our school district has based their budget on the fact that they have that. We're right now in this county budget process, and we have no idea if we're going to get PELT for sure, or if we're going to get secure rural schools. It's pretty hard to plan what you're going to do with your money when you don't know what money you have.
You know, for Kane County, on a rough, give or take, a $16, $17 million annual budget, when you start talking in terms of $1.5 million, $2 million, all of a sudden just disappearing, because the feds aren't able to meet their obligations and their program needs, puts us in a heck of a stake. So as Gordon's been saying, we're going to be dependent upon this appropriations process to make sure that we stay whole.
Short of making them productive and money-making entities, the public lands, what do you do? I mean, how do you solve the funding problem? What would you like to see Congress do in the interim?
Actually, it's more of a political problem than it is a practical problem. And particularly as we take a look at expenditures and funding and budget levels in this country, we just need to know what our priorities are. And I think our priorities in these rural counties are really quite high, and we need to sustain that.
The federal government has budgets that are guaranteed year after year, Social Security, some of those entitlement programs. And we would like to see it something like an entitlement program where we're guaranteed we have that money each year.
So you don't have to go back and beg?
Yeah.
You spent half that $1 million just flying back there trying to ask them
No, not that, but we do spend a lot, yeah.
I get you. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the county seat. Gordon, thank you for all the time you've put in over the years on county seat and your belief in the project. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate what you guys do to get the word out on issues that people may not understand.
It was your idea. Just remember that. All right. Thank you for inviting us into your home every week on the county seat. We do appreciate it. Be sure to share this with your friends. Remember, as I always say, local government is where your life happens, so make sure you're involved in the process. We'll see you next week on the county seat. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the county seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the county seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.